Tennessee State Standard US.07. This state standard says you've got to be able to describe the differences between old and new immigrants, analyze the assimilation process for new immigrants, and determine the impacts of increased migration on American society, including Angel Island, competition for jobs, Ellis Island, rise in nativism, push and pull factors, Jacob Riis, ethnic clusters, Chinese Exclusion Act, and Gentleman's Agreement, along with Jane Addams. So the first thing we're going to start with is the two groups of immigrants that are going to come to the United States during this time period. You have two groups. You have old immigrants and you have new immigrants. Now, in this picture up here, I've got an old person over here and I've got a young person. That doesn't, the old and new immigrants doesn't refer to their age. The old and new immigrants refers to when they came to the United States. Obviously, the old immigrants came to U.S. first, and the new immigrants came after the old immigrants. Okay, so it's not referring to old people and young people. It's just, what they're called based on who got here first. So let's go into these. Let's go through old immigrants first. Okay, old immigrants. First thing about them is they're going to be all from Europe, and they're going to be from two areas of Europe. They are from North and West Europe. Okay, so they immigrated from places in Northern and Western Europe. And these two regions in Europe are going to be very similar to what was already here in the United States as far as people groups, as far as traditions, languages, customs. The next thing about them, their religion, they are Protestants. And if you don't know what Protestant means, that's okay. Protestant basically just means Christian, any religion that's not Catholic. Okay, Catholic and Protestant are two different divisions within Christianity. The next thing about the old immigrants, language spoken, they mostly spoke English. And then welcome to the U.S., they were easily welcomed. So life for these old immigrants when they got here, it was pretty good. They fit in, they spoke the same language, they had the same religion. Life was pretty good for these old immigrants. Now, years later, when the new immigrants start showing up, it's going to be a lot different. And you can see why when we go through these four categories for them. So first, new immigrants, they are from South and they are from Eastern Europe. Now that right there is a huge difference. These areas of Europe are going to be a lot different. There's a lot different customs, a lot different languages. It's not the same as what we're going to experience with the old immigrants. The next thing, their religion. They were Catholic and they were Jewish. And since they were Catholic and Jewish, that was different than what the United States predominantly was. During this time period, the U.S. was predominantly Protestant. And so these Catholic and Jewish immigrants are coming here, and it's just different. The next thing about them, language spoken. Most of them did not speak English. So when these immigrants get here, they're going to have a tough time fitting into the United States. And the last thing it says, were they welcomed into the U.S.? They were allowed to come in, but they were not welcomed. So we'll put absolutely not. And, you kind of feel sorry for these new immigrants getting here, but you can see just kind of looking at this right here, the differences between the old and the new, you can kind of see, why it was that Americans are going to treat them differently. And this doesn't make it right by any stretch of the imagination, but it just kind of gives you kind of this look into why they're going to be treated differently from the old immigrants were. So another thing that you got to know about immigrants is this idea of what are called push and pull factors. And push and pull factors, basically what that refers to was we're talking about the reasons that immigrants came here or the reasons that immigrants left their homeland. So let's just kind of go through these. So the first one, the push. What push is, push was any factor, so let's go, any factor or reason, any factor or reason why immigrants, but IMM period, left their home country. So basically push refers to what was pushing them out out of their country? Like, what are some reasons they would have left? And some of these push factors are very, very easy to understand. For instance, the old immigrants, their major push factors that pushed them out of their country, one was called the Irish potato famine. So in Ireland, the entire crop of potatoes, which is the major food that Irish people were eating at this time period, it failed. And so rather than sit there and starve, Irish people immigrate to America. So this famine is going to push Irish people out of Ireland, and they're going to come to the United States. The other big push factor for these old immigrants happened in Germany, and it was a German failed revolution. So in Germany, the peasants, the lower class of people, tried to overthrow the king. They didn't work out for them. They lost. And if you try to overthrow a king, it's not a good idea to just hang out in the country after you fail, because that king is going to have some hurt feelings, and those hurt feelings are going to lead to people like dying. So these German immigrants were pushed out of their country, and they flocked here to the United States. And so those were push ideas. And now for new immigrants, the push was a little bit different because they came at different times. The new immigrants, the biggest thing that is going to push new immigrants is called religious persecution. So since these new immigrants were Catholic and Jewish, they were being treated unfairly in their home countries. So they decided to come to the United States, where we have religious freedom, to be able to practice the religion that they wanted to. Now, that's a push factor. So push is going to be what pushes people out of their country. And pull factors, what pull factors are, let's just put them right here. Pull factors are what bring immigrants to the United States. And the pull factors are probably easier to understand why an immigrant would come here. For instance, with the old immigrants probably came here because there was food. There were jobs, democracy, right? Especially with these German immigrants who had failed to overthrow the government, they want to come somewhere where it's free. They're not going to have to overthrow a king, right? They're going to be able to elect who their president is. So food, jobs, democracy, another big one would be religious freedom. And all of those reasons right there, those are reasons why people would have been pulled into the United States, why they would have left their country and then chose to come here to the United States. Those are all reasons for the push and pull of immigrants. So when immigrants came to the United States, immigrants arrived in two major locations. The first one, and this is a picture of it in the top right-hand corner, is Angel Island. And the second one, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, is Ellis Island. And Ellis Island is probably the more famous of the two of these islands. That doesn't mean that Angel Island isn't important by any stretch of the imagination. It's just Ellis Island is probably going to be a little more well known. So what these two islands are, these are the two locations. So let's write it down over here. Two locations where immigrants, we'll put IMM period again, first arrive in the U.S. So these immigrants, when they came here, they didn't just show up on the beaches and be like, hey, we're here for America. No, they had to be processed into America. So they had to come to these certain locations. And at these locations, you can see a boat here at Angel Island. These boats would pull up to the harbor. Same here down at Ellis Island. They would have pulled right in here. And these boats unload these immigrants from these foreign countries. And these immigrants had to be processed into America. All right, so let's just put that down in our notes over here. Let's put down that these places process immigrants into America. And this process was very nerve-wracking for immigrants. When they would arrive at these islands, they would be interviewed, they would be asked questions, they would have to go through a medical exam, All of this to prove that they were, in fact, okay to come here to the United States. And so these immigrants, when they arrive at these places, they would have dressed in their best clothes. They would have been really, really nervous. But at the same time, they're excited because, there were factors that had pushed them to the United States, and they're factors that America had used to pull them in. And they're excited to be here, but they're nervous because they want to make sure they get to stay here. And the other thing you got to know about these two places is you got to know where each of these places is located. Angel Island is located in San Francisco. So let's just write San Francisco. So we'll put San Fran, which is obviously in California. And then Ellis Island is in New York City. I'm just going to put NYC. So these are the two locations where immigrants are going to arrive first into the United States. So the next thing about immigration is it's going to have a huge impact on America as a whole, and America is going to change, and it's a good change. But so the first thing you got to look at with the impact of immigration is that immigrants are going to bring their own culture with them. When immigrants get here, they don't just want to forget who they are, where they come from. So they bring their culture with them. They bring their traditions, their food, their way of life. They're going to bring it with them. And what they do is in major cities, they're going to settle into a few distinct neighborhoods around people that are from their home country. So the three most famous neighborhoods that get settled in these places are places called Little Italy. So what Little Italy is, it's a place where mostly Italian immigrants are going to settle into the United States. The next one is called Chinatown. All right, Chinatown is going to be where Chinese immigrants settle into the United States. So you've got Little Italy, you've got Chinatown, and you've got New Ireland. And these were all just pretty much these neighborhoods where immigrants live together. And like I said, they're going to want to live around their people group. They're going to want to live around people who speak the language, who have similar customs. And so that's why you would have this. And now there's a lot of negatives that Americans during this time period felt about immigration. One of the biggest things, and this is even true still to our world today, you hear this in the news a lot too, is some of the negatives of immigration. It's that Americans, people who were already here, are going to get nervous that they're going to lose their jobs because all these immigrants are coming over and they're trying to make their way in this world, in this country, and they're going to start looking for jobs. So some of the negatives is that Americans are worried about losing their jobs. And that whole idea of losing your jobs to immigrants, it is what it is, but at the end of the day, usually what happens to some of these jobs is the person who's willing to work hardest is going to be given that job. And that made Americans who had been here nervous that they could potentially lose their job, they could lose their way of life to this immigrant that was coming here. So the other thing that was really big with immigrants is there are going to be people who are going to help these immigrants. Now here in a second we're going to talk about people who are going to be against immigrants. But there were two really, really important people who are going to try to help immigrants and help them have a better life here in the United States. The first one is this lady down here in the bottom left corner. Her name is Jane Addams. And I always tell my classes, Jane Addams is a saint. Like, she is like one of the most the amazing ladies in U.S. history. And what she did is she actually, her family was insanely rich. And rather than use that fortune to buy yachts and go on vacations, she said, I want to do something positive with it. I want to help people. And so she founded what was called Whole House. And Whole House is going to be located in Chicago. And what Whole House is it's a settlement house for immigrants. It's kind of like a modern day soup kitchen or a homeless shelter. And she bought this massive, huge home in the middle of downtown Chicago and opened it up free of charge to help immigrants. So at Whole House, let's just write down what she did. She helped immigrants settle into the U.S. And some of the things that she did at Whole House is she would have classes that would teach English, or she would run like a daycare for moms to drop their kids off so they could go to work, or she would do just a bunch of different things. She would open up, let people stay there. She would feed people out of it, and she did this all on her own money. And so, like I said, this lady Jane Addams, she's a saint. Like some of the things she did. Let's put a little halo over top of her down here, and maybe some wings or something. Ooh, well, those don't really look like what I was trying to do. Those kind of look, a little more negative, but those are supposed to be angel wings. But so, like I said, she's just a saint. She's really going to try to help people, and she does great things at a Whole House in Chicago. This other guy, probably one of my favorite guys from this time period, is Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis is a very, very important, and he's going to do great things for the immigrants. And one thing about Jacob Riis is he was a former immigrant. He was a former immigrant. Let's put down he was a former immigrant who had turned into a newspaper writer. And Jacob Riis grew up living this life that immigrants had to. He knew their struggle. He knew how bad it was. And so Jacob Riis decides to go and document this. And during this time period, immigrants lived in what are called tenements. And what a tenement is a horrible, awful apartment building. Put APT for apartment. And these tenements, like, you might think, oh, I've lived in crappy apartments. Nah, you haven't lived in a tenement. Tenements were gross. They were disgusting. People died from the health effects in them. They had no running water. They have no toilets. They have no trash pickup. They're gross. And so Jacob Riis goes, I need to do something about this. I need to go and document these tenements and tell the stories of the tenements. So he does that. He goes to the tenements. He takes pictures. He interviews people. And he is going to write this book, and his book is called How the Other Half Lives. And what How the Other Half Lives did, let's just write down what it did down here. Let's draw a little arrow. Is it documented life in tenements. And it did this through taking photographs. And he would go into these tenements at night or during the day. He would take pictures. He would interview the immigrants there, and he would tell their stories. And the biggest thing that I really want to stress that you remember about Jacob Riis is he was doing this. He was doing this to cause change. He hoped that by writing this book, How the Other Half Lives, he would have an impact on the tenements and that people would be educated and want to stop them. And that's exactly what happens with the tenements. Here's some of the most famous pictures of these tenements. And these were all taken by Jacob Riis. And like I said, what he would do is he would take these pictures and he would tell the people's story. Like up here, you've got these 3 kids who are asleep on the steps on the outside of one of these tenements. Just obviously just not great conditions. Up here, this is probably one of the saddest pictures he took in the top right. You've got this little kid who is living in these gross, awful conditions. And I mean, you could just look at the picture and you can just tell, gosh, it just doesn't look good. And so he's taking these pictures, like I said, and he's trying to cause change. This picture down the bottom left, same thing. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people living in a space that's like the size of the closet. And then this picture down here in the bottom right, this is probably his most famous picture. This is taken in the middle of the night. It's one of these just small cramped rooms. You can see all the stuff that's over here. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people living in this tiny location. But like I said, the main thing that Jacob Riis did is he caused change. He caused the tenements to change. All right, so cause change with writings. Because of all of this immigration, there is going to be a backlash, meaning not all people are going to be okay with these immigrants coming to the U.S. And so this new movement gets started during this time period that is called nativism. Okay, and we're going to talk about what nativism is. So what nativism is, let's just write down a definition of it. Nativism were Americans who hate immigrants. And let's put down that they consider themselves native to the U.S. All right, so natives, like I said, they're these American citizens. They don't like immigrants, and actually, these natives consider themselves to be Native Americans. Now, we're not talking about like Native Americans, but we're talking about like they were native, they were from here. But what's funny is most of these natives were not really from here. They were immigrants as well, and they're really going to focus in on hating the new immigrants. All right, so they're really going to focus on these new immigrants. And they're going to start making some laws, making some changes to try to stop immigration. To make these laws that they wanted to stop immigration, they created a political party. And their political party was called the Know Nothing Party. So let's just put down it was the Political Party of the Natives. Now, you might be saying, wow, what a stupid name for a political party. The Know Nothing Party? Yeah, I'm going to vote for the party that literally knows nothing. But that's not really what it was named for. It was named because at first it was supposed to be the secret that you were in the Know Nothing Party. So if someone asked you, hey, are you in that native political party? And you were supposed to respond with, oh, I don't know anything about that. I know nothing about that. And so that's where it kind of got its nickname. We look back at it and we say, I would never have voted for people who said they don't know anything. But that's not exactly what it was. Last thing on this slide about these Know Nothing parties. They're going to pass two major laws that are going to change America. The first is called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And the second one is called the Gentleman's Agreement. We'll talk about both of those on the next slide. Last thing from this one, if you look up in the top corner at this flag, this was the flag that was kind of the logo of the natives. And if you look at it, you can read what it says. It says, Native Americans beware of foreign influence. And the thing that gets me is you look at it and some of the letters, particularly the N's, are backwards. And wow, you're calling yourself the Know Nothing Party, so you don't know anything, and you can't get the N's right. But what I found is the reason they did that is it was kind of jab at immigrants who didn't really know how to read or write English, and they couldn't spell, and so they kind of did this little jab at immigrants by putting the N's backwards up here. The laws that the Know Nothing Party passed, we're going to go through those real quick, and they're pretty simple, okay, especially this first one, the Chinese Exclusion Act. You can probably just look at the Chinese Exclusion Act, the name, and figure out what it did. It is going to stop Chinese immigrants from coming to the U.S. All right, so like I said, pretty simple. There's really not a lot that's that complicated about the Chinese Exclusion Act. But what they do, I mean, they literally just like make this law that stopped Chinese immigrants completely. And the reason they did this is they were nervous that Chinese immigrants were taking jobs from Americans. So let's put down that it was done because Chinese immigrants were taking jobs from Americans. So literally Chinese immigration to the U.S. was stopped. Nobody else was allowed to come. The other law that they're going to do is the Gentleman's Agreement. And the Gentleman's Agreement is a little bit more complex. What this is going to be an agreement between the United States between the U.S. and Japan. And this agreement is going to be made by the Know Nothing Party to try to stop Japanese immigrants from entering the United States. So the thing about this is it's not really a law, it's not really a government issued thing, it's more of just an understanding between the two countries. So the United States, the natives, the Know Nothing Party, they call up Japan. They say, Japan, look, we don't want your immigrants here anymore. We've got to come up with a solution to stop your immigrants from coming here. And Japan goes, okay, so what we'll do for you in the United States. So this is the side that Japan does. So what Japan does is they stop allowing their immigrants or their people from coming to U.S. So Japan goes, yeah, America, we can do that for you. We're not going to issue any visas, anything to let our people come to you. America goes, great, awesome, Japan, appreciate that. Japan goes, whoa, hold on a second. You got to do something for us. Japan says, look, if we're going to stop people from coming there, you got to make life better for the people who are already there. And, a little backstory, life for Japanese immigrants was terrible. Most of them were living in California, And in California, they were facing discrimination. The particular kind of discrimination that they were experiencing was happening in schools. So the United States is going to have a side of the gentleman's agreement. The U.S. write down that they have to desegregate schools in California. So what America had done is they had segregated schools and sent Japanese kids to these lesser, non-funded schools so that they wouldn't go to school with the white Americans. And Japan says, look, if we're going to stop sending them you guys immigrants, y'all got to make life better for the ones that are already there. And America goes, okay, that's not that bad of a deal. We'll make that deal. So that's a gentleman's agreement. You got Japan agrees to stop sending immigrants to the United States. And then you've got that the U.S. has to desegregate schools in California.